Okay, so what we've done so far is we've kind of talked through what is a strategy coordinator. Can anyone remember at least the big pieces of the definition I proposed? What is the uh what type of person is the strategy coordinator? What do they have?
In the Father's heart.
They have the Father's heart. What are they focused on?
The apostolic task of establishing indigenous churches.
Yeah, so they're focused on establishing local ownership of the apostolic task among the gaps, people or place. So if we think have the Father's heart, they're trying to get local ownership of what? The core apostolic task, which is the four fields, this repeating process of entry, gospel, disciple making, church planting, leadership development. It's going without us. And then where specifically are we trying to do that? We're trying to do that in the gaps where there's lack of the knowledge of God's glory. It's an unreached people or place. So then we have to think through, okay, that seems like a really big vision to see a people that's been unreached for 2,000 years become reached with the gospel. And what we've seen is the best way to see a population segment, see the gospel go through it, is through multiplying movements. And so then we have to say, okay, how does that happen? Well, we don't cause a multiplying movement of disciples, but we can be catalytic in doing some activities that God uses to stir up by his spirit response to the gospel and disciple making that's indigenous. So we're always holding this tension and balance of we don't create movements, we don't cause multiplication, but what we can do, and Steve Smith used this analogy that was really helpful. It's actually in the book Spirit Walk. So for the interns, you guys will be going through that. But he uses the analogy of a sailboat. And when a sailboat is on the water and there's no wind, what should the sailor be doing? The sailor should be putting out every square inch of sail that's on the boat. He wants it to be as big as possible. So when the least amount of wind comes, what happens? The boat makes progress. But when a lot of wind comes and your sails are open, guess what happens? You get a lot of progress. And so when we think about even to some of the things we've already discussed about expecting God to move, that means we have our sails up. That means we're doing the things that we know that need to happen, that we're resisting low expectation and we're persisting on reproducible methods because we want to see as much traction as possible when the wind blows. All that to say, we have to have just a few quantifiable stewardships of a strategy coordinator. So this is actually going to be our outline for the rest of our SC training. What we've done so far has really been about making sure that we have a good definition, that we have shared vision. This is where we're going. What is a strategy coordinator? But the stewardships is really where the rubber begins to meet the road. So we say that there's 5 T's because all of these things are going to start with T. And you're going to go into breakout groups and you're going to train this back because this is, if you get the outline, you'll begin to think differently. You'll start to think through things. So the 5 T's of stewarding a strategy among a people group. So the first T is target. This is perhaps in a video you've already seen, so you're going to be familiar with this, but I want you to be able to reproduce it. Target is answering the question, what is success? So if the strategy coordinator is looking for segments where the gospel is not, we have to define what that is. We have to define the people or place that we're working towards seeing a healthy indigenous reproducing church. So when we define target, what I encourage people to think through is a target that's not too large and a target that's not too small. So for example, if if I was to move to India, and I would say that my target is to reach every unreached people group in India, would you say my target is too big or too small?
Big.
Too big.
Pretty big, right? Um, but the contrast of that, let's say, for example, I moved to Nashville, and I say that I want to reach all 160 Tibetan Buddhists. Too big, too small?
Too small.
Probably
Too small.
Probably too small. And I just made that number up. I don't even know if there's 160 Tibetan Buddhists in Nashville. But I think you get the idea. So we want to get a target, a focus segment, and we want to define it in two ways: a people group and a place. So if we go back to the two examples, I've moved to India, and let's say, for example, I chose Bengali speaking Hindus in Calcutta. Too big or too small? Or maybe I'm getting close to what would be a good target. What do you think?
I think it's a better target than either of the first two.
It's better, right? So let's not be the target police, but at least we can see we're moving in a healthier direction where we've defined, okay, I have a place and I have a people group. Maybe it's linguistic religious, or it could be all the way to the people group level. But we're defining what is success. Now, for a strategy coordinator, when we think past people and place, I think we define success of things that we've already talked about as healthy indigenous reproducing churches among that segment. So what would it look like to say, I was just in Nashville. We want to see healthy indigenous multiplying churches among Kurds in Nashville. So that's a population segment of about 20,000. So we have a people, a place, to what extent? So that is target. Now, why is it important to know this? Because if someone comes to you, and I know a leader of another ministry who went to Germany looking for partners, and he started asking all of these other ministries is, how do you define success? And they couldn't answer the question. If you can't define success, you're probably going to accomplish nothing. You're going to be stuck doing good things. But whenever you define what success is, even as we start thinking about all the way back to the beginning of our conversation, and Christina was talking about how we use our time. The more clarity we have in our target, the more clarity we have in what we should do and what we should not do. So if I want to reach Pakistani Muslims in Houston, and I'm looking at my calendar, it may not be the best use of my time to go to Las Vegas to do a training for someone to reach Buddhist. Again, not a bad thing, great thing. But is it the thing that's going to help see the vision accomplished? Thanks, Clint. All right. So the next T, so we target is what is success. Tools is what do we do? So whenever you think of, again, the four fields just as a great placeholder, entry, gospel, discipleship, church formation, leadership development, that becomes kind of our toolbox and saying, what do we do in each of these fields? What do we do for entry? What do we do as a gospel tool? What do we do for discipleship? What is our simple reproducible pattern in all of these? How do we begin to gather people into church? So tools, this training is not going to go into what tools to use. We'll have one night where we talk about tools, but we'll be talking more about what makes a good tool. How do we identify and evaluate tools? And then you'll have an exercise of coming up with basically 100 ministry ideas. to basically help you think creatively about potential tools. The next T, we'll actually spend 2 nights on this one because I think this is one of our greatest areas of impact, is teaming. So teaming is a verb. So not team, not just your team, but teaming. And teaming is answering the question, who can I count on? So you're probably beginning to see why target is the first one, because we have to first define success. Who are the people in place that we're going to be working with to help define our tools? Because our tools need to be adapted, contextualized. As Kevin says, we want to fish with what fish like. And then same with teaming. As I begin to find collaboration and ministry partners, we need to be focusing in the same direction. We need to be going after the same people in place. Approach may be different, methodology may be different, but we need to have alignment in, hey, I've taken stewardship of this people group in this place. So teaming is, and we have several modules where we'll walk through helping you think through what is a way to team with people from other organizations, other churches, people who are just individuals, even how you can team with non-evangelical ministries. And you may say, well, that's heresy. Let me give you one example. Catholic Charities is a non-evangelical ministry that resettles refugees. And if your focused people group is coming as refugees, guess who you should have relationship with? You should have relationship with Catholic Charities, because that is giving you access to your people group. So we'll spend a lot of time talking about teaming and how to team as a verb, teaming well with others. The 4th T is training. Training is answering the question, how do we multiply? So if you remember, strategy coordinator, someone with a father's heart who's seeking to see local ownership of the core apostolic task among a people or a place. To see that transfer, we have to train. The only way we multiply is training. We can see 1st generation, 2nd generation things happen because it's really dependent on us. But really what we want to see is 4th generation and beyond. And so we have to train and release authority for that to happen. So we're going to be talking about training. And again, this is a training to talk about training. So it's not going to be training on training, but looking at training pathways, training paradigms. And then one thing that I have been thinking a lot about lately is, for many of us, maybe just one exception, we're from predominantly Anglo background. And oftentimes when we think about training people like us. When we think about training, we need to be thinking about, how am I going to train my people group once they come to faith? And we implement that training from the beginning, because if we want training to multiply, what multiplies among Anglos may not multiply among Fulani. And what multiplies through Fulani may not multiply among Hindi-speaking Hindus. So when we talk about our target, that'll be next Monday, we're going to talk about some research and learning about your segment, learning about your target, so that you can be informed in your tools and training. But ultimately, training is answering the question, how do we multiply? And then lastly, the last T is tracking. And you might call this accountability. But ultimately, what we're looking to answer is the question, how are we doing? Which would be things, field activity reports, looking at coaching relationships and coaching patterns. We want people to look and say, hey, how am I doing? How can I be better? Because for some of us, I think there's a hesitancy here, because we can get our feelings hurt when someone asks a hard question. But remember, it's not about you. If you have a coach, and I would say most people who are serving as coaches in any organization, their heart is for you. So when you get asked a question, hey, how's this going? How's this going? It's really just to encourage the work. And whenever we have this this feeling at our core that this isn't about us, that this is about God's glory among the nations, our feelings should get hurt less whenever something doesn't go right. We get asked hard questions, but tracking is an important part because all of these things begin to loop around. So once we've defined what success is, guess what? We know what to track. If we say we want to get after healthy indigenous reproducing churches, we kind of have a pathway to follow. We know, okay, to get there, I got to go to lost people. I have to share the gospel. The Lord has to bring people into the kingdom. I'm going to disciple them to make disciples. We're going to gather them into church. We're going to raise up leaders. There's a process. But along the way, there's some tracking benchmarks. And then as we're tracking, it loops back to target, because how will we know when we're done? This is an important aspect of a strategy coordinator, is we have to know when we exit and entrust. Meaning we have given the ministry away. We've seen the Lord raise up apostolic leaders who are going to continue, and we become kind of Pauline in a sense of we leave a geographic area and we maintain relationship. We don't know when that happens if we're not tracking. So you see target and tracking ties together. And then as we learn what are effective tools, that's what we train. So you see tools and training are linked together. What do we train? We train tools. How do we know what to train? We've applied the tools. And then as we're training, guess what's going to inevitably happen? We've done our best to discern what's a good gospel tool for Tibetan Buddhist. We did our best, but a Tibetan Buddhist comes to faith, guess what he's going to do? He's going to tweak it, and we're going to learn about this through a training. And so then through training, our tools get sharpened. And so it just becomes this circular that target and tracking is linked together. What is a win? How are we doing? What do we do? How do we multiply? They link together. But at the core of all of this is teaming. So like I heard many of you say, hey, we need hundreds, we need thousands of people engaging our people group. Absolutely. That's the teaming piece. But what circles around teaming is tools, because we just don't want teaming for no purpose. We want teaming for engagement and activity. And how do we get engagement and activity of more people? We have to do training. But all of that is under the umbrella of we've defined what is success. Remember the definition of strategy. We're lining up all of our resources to accomplish a goal or a vision. And if our goal and vision is God's glory among a people group, we're lining that up. And then along the way, we're tracking these benchmarks. Okay, hey, we've seen 40 people baptized. Now we're seeing third generation groups. Now we're seeing multiple streams of 5+ generations. And then during this whole pathway, because we've tracked progress, we're preparing our entrustment, and we're kind of going back into the shadows a little bit. So I give one analogy, and then I'm going to put you in breakout rooms. I just want you to train this back to each other, just walking through the 5 T's and answering the questions. I've done this. Let me just stop sharing. I've shared this so many times, and I found it to be so helpful, especially for Westerners. Oftentimes, whenever I'm trying to do teaming with people, a lot of people with really good intentions kind of have a Superman syndrome. Like, I'm going to do this. It's about me. And I give the analogy of pick your sports team. We won't use football because I'm in DFW. So let's use basketball. Basketball is a good example, because no one's really lost a season yet in basketball. But how many players are on a basketball court at any given time? 5 players. That's right. And so whenever I think of the outsider, that's us. We're not among the people group we're trying to reach. When do I get to play basketball on my team? When there's not enough players. Why? Because I'm no good. I'm not a good basketball player. I wear the wrong clothes. I don't know how to dribble. I do everything wrong, but I'm willing. And the Lord will use really bad players. But the goal is for me to get more players. So I'm the D team. I get out on the field and I play. I go share the gospel. I'm trying to disciple these people. I'm doing the apostolic task as the outsider. But really what I'm looking for is someone who's better than me. So maybe the C team is someone who's close culture. So maybe my target is Somali. Let's go with Somali because there's some, and an Ethiopian shows up, Muslim background Ethiopian. Hey, I'm trying to tag out. Get in there, go get him. And then guess what that Ethiopian does? He goes and finds, yep, a Somali believer, leads them to the Lord, starts discipling them, and then guess what happens? We get the Somalis on the court. And I have this phase where there's a point in time where I'm playing. There's not a time where I just am not doing the apostolic task. I'm doing the apostolic task. But as close culture partners come in, guess what I do? I go to the bench. And you know what you might do from the bench? You're an encourager. You're an equipper. It's like, hey, I saw this. Maybe you could do this different. And then there becomes a point in time where the bench is actually getting full. And then I'm not even on the bench. I don't even get to sub in. I'm maybe just a coach. I'm encouraging, I'm resourcing. And then there becomes a point in time where there's indigenous coaching, there's indigenous leadership development. I kind of become like the cheerleader. I take like a couple steps away from the bench because the A team's on the court, B team's on the bench. We got C team doing encouragement and coaching. I'm the cheerleader. And then when we think of exit and entrust, it's not that I disappear. It's not that I don't care about what's happening. I'm going all the way into the stands. I'm just someone in the shadows in the stands. And I just get to say, look what the Lord is doing. So when we think of our role as an outside catalyst, it's another word for a strategy coordinator, someone who's catalyzing something from the outside. We all got to get on the court. We all got to go out and share the gospel, make disciples, do the things that's going to lead to reproducing movements, networking, training. But we have to recognize when to step back and become the cheerleader, become the coach, become the bench warmer, become the resourcer, become the encourager. Because I just think that we would see more fruit if people had the humility to not get credit for stuff. And so when we think of the strategy coordinator, there's 5 T's. Think of it as placeholders. Think of it as paradigms, whatever you want to think about it.